right, y'all. Hello and welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. Glad to have you here. We're going to have a great time. We're going to talk about gun stuff, but in a different way than I usually talk about it. And I've got another video back for you. I spoke with him a few weeks ago, and it was a great conversation. Check that out. But before I get into everything, be sure to like this, share this, and also hit that subscribe button. That way you'll be notified whenever I upload a new interview, which I do every Wednesday and Friday evening at 7 o'clock Eastern. And, you know, I'm not even going to wait. I'm just going to go ahead and bring him on. I have with me from Patriot Academy and Wall Builders, Mr. Rick Green. How you doing, brother?
Hey, man. Good to be back. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I've been getting more into, you know, the gun debate and gun stuff, but I haven't done any interviews or any conversations on being a gun owner, and I just became one last September, so almost a year.
Yeah.
But I still consider myself to be a beginner, and you know, I figured there's a lot of tips that people can give. I've looked a lot of them up, but you've been in the gun world for a long time, so I'm looking forward to picking your brain, and I'm hoping that this will help others in my audience who are thinking about becoming gun owners, or maybe they just got one and they kind of just want to learn the ropes a bit.
Yeah, man. I'll just be honest with you. I was that guy that was had all the hot rhetoric about how important it was to defend the Second Amendment and use it, and then I didn't carry, and so I had a license for years. I think 15 years. I had a handgun license in Texas. This was while I was in the House too. So I'm passing legislation for the NRA, man. I got the biggest bill in the country, stopping Andrew Cuomo from suing gun manufacturers. I mean, and then I'm not carrying a firearm. I was just such a wimp. I mean, but in truth, it was because I knew I wasn't trained. I knew I wasn't ready. And so, for me, I had this like two extremes. Like on one extreme, I was like, okay, I really don't know for sure that I would perform in the moment. I mean, I grew up shooting on the ranch, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But then on the other extreme, I was like, I don't need training because, I'll step up and handle it. So I was like this totally opposite thing that kept me from actually carrying and being ready to defend. So now I am a major proponent of training. My first time was 2012. It rocked my world. It changed my life. Now I carry everywhere. I do training on a regular basis, and I've trained and gotten about 10,000 different people to go through trainings with us, and I'm on a mission to get more and more, because I want us to have people with good training so they know what they're doing. But in every store, every restaurant, everywhere, so that if there's wolves out there, man, and when they show up, we need good folks ready to defend. Yeah,
definitely. And it's funny because I'm kind of like you. I mean, I would. People would tell me, after I told people I got a gun, they're like, "Oh, now you're talking about the Second Amendment a lot." I'm like, "No, I was talking about it before. I was already writing articles about gun ownership and stuff like that, but I didn't have a gun."
We were both there on the principle, right? Like we understood intellectually why it was important and all of that, but physically, I wasn't ready. And same thing, man. I'm looking forward to having you out to one of our trainings and giving you the chance to get that, because it changes. I honestly, the first time I went to a training, I convinced myself it's for my son. I'm taking him. He just turned 16. He needs it. I'm telling you, dude, 3 hours in, I mean, like the first morning before lunch on the first morning, I was eyes wide open going, wow, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I was shocked at how quickly I could become proficient and all the little things that help so much and put me at ease on the safety side of things, on the proficiency side of things. And by the end of the 4-day course that I did, man, I'm telling you, I walked different, sat differently in places. I mean, it changed a lot. A lot of it was mental. It's not just the physical training. There's a lot of muscle memory that you practice. But probably the most important thing was the lectures and the mental side of really thinking through the moral and ethical issues of, am I willing to take a life? Am I willing to fire this weapon? If I'm going to carry it and some guy's attacking my daughter or me or my wife or whoever, am I willing to kill them? And so really thinking through that biblically, historically, ethically, all those things was really important for me. And I think for a lot of people that go through through our courses, that's probably even more important than the physical part. It takes all of it, but I mean that mental part's huge.
So now that you mentioned that, let me ask you this: what was it that made you that got you over that hump to where you're like, okay, I'm going to start carrying now? Like, well, I'm sure it wasn't any one thing, but what
Yeah.
was it that actually said, okay, I need to start, carrying on my person?
I think when I first looked at the data on how often violent crimes happen in America, because I was almost naive. I was there's a there's a proverb in the good book that says a simpleton walks blindly, a wise person foresees danger and takes
Mm,
precaution. A simpleton or a fool walks blindly on and suffers the consequences. And I was the
mm,
fool for first 39 years of my life. I thought, it won't happen to me or my family. It won't happen in our neighborhood. It won't happen in our grocery store. And then when I started looking at the data and really started reading, where these things happen, it's not just in the bad part of town. It's
right.
everywhere. I mean, violent crimes, it's about 4 million times a year across this country. And it's gotten worse in the last couple of years. But I mean, this was 2012. So that's 10 years ago for me.
Yeah.
And even then I was realizing, wow, man, I mean, this happens all the time and it absolutely could happen to my family. And how would I feel if it happened to my family? What would I do if somebody broke into my
Hmm.
home, or we're at a grocery store and one of those things happens and my family is harmed? How would I feel about not having taken the precautions and done the prep and been ready? And so that totally changed my mindset. And that was at that first training was a lecture about that sort of thing. And then I started
Hmm.
reading, studying the data myself. And fortunately, I haven't ever been in a situation like that. It hasn't happened. I hope it never happens. We
Right.
don't at all. We're not about like, oh, let's go get training so we can go after the bad. Not at all. We
Right.
want to avoid the situation if at all possible. But should it happen, we want to be ready. And there was a
Right.
pivotal moment for me too when a couple of church shootings happened in here in Texas that were neighborhoods just like mine. One of them
Hmm.
just an hour and a half from my house. Those examples really drove it home even more that in a church setting, in a restaurant setting, it could happen anywhere, and you just don't know where it's going to be. So it's that old Boy Scout thing of always being prepared. I was not a Boy Scout. I was like the opposite of a Boy Scout, but at any rate, so that was kind of my pivotal switch mentally that, hey, I need to invest time and money into this.
Yeah, that's kind of describes my journey too. But for me, it was also because we all know about how often crimes happen. We can easily look that up. But what people don't know is how often people use guns to defend themselves. And there's been
Mm,
a lot of different studies on this. And on the high end, I mean, it happens over 2 million times per year.
that's
On the
right.
more conservative end, I think the lowest number I saw was like 70,000. That though both of those numbers are more than the amount of homicides that happen.
That's
So,
right.
but these stories don't get reported because if somebody comes up on you with a knife and you scare them away with your gun, which is how it usually happens. Most of these don't even involve you
That's right.
firing the gun,
That's
and
right.
then they run away. You probably didn't call the police about that, and even if you did, it didn't make it into the news.
That's
So we
right.
don't hear about these cases, but when they do these studies, it happens a lot. Now, I think most people, like you said, it's most likely you're never going to need to use it, but
Yeah.
it's that kind of thing to where you're like, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it.
Yes.
It's like insurance. You get insurance hoping that nothing happens, but if it does, you're covered.
Yeah.
So that was kind of it for me. And at that point, it just didn't make sense for me not to carry.
Yeah, man, you're spot on. You're right on with the numbers as well. You've done your homework. I mean,
Mhm.
that's exactly, and most people don't know that, just like you said, because it's not reported. And typically the news is, oh, the bad gun, there's too many guns and it's the
Mhm.
gun's fault. And John Lott's book, More Guns, Less Crime, was a big factor for me
Yes.
22 years ago when I was in the legislature. I was always quoting from that book because if on the principle side of things, of just the idea that the Second Amendment's a good thing, and that statistically every gun you take off the streets, you might have stopped one crime from being committed with that gun, but you also allowed 5 more crimes to be committed by people not
Mhm.
having that gun. And that's because it's about 5 times as often that guns are used to stop crimes. And normally it's exactly what you said. It's even just letting that person know that you have it. It's saying stop and even making a
Mhm.
motion towards the weapon, or having to actually brandish it, but not even point in on them
Right.
to stop the crime. And so rarely does it actually have to be used. And when it is, I mean, there's so many stories that don't get reported. John Lott, again, has all these on
Mhm.
his website at Crime Research. But even right after Uvalde, that was so bad.
Yeah.
The very next day in Virginia, this lady had her handgun in her purse. Bad guy comes in, going to shoot up a crowd of about 40 people. Soon as he starts firing, she's close enough in proximity. She takes out her handgun and she ends that guy's life and saves everybody at that party. So the only person killed was the bad guy. That's Lord willing, that's how it would happen more often. But proximity is essential for that to happen. You got to have a trained, and it's not just a good guy with a gun, it's a trained good guy or gal with a gun.
Yes.
And when you have that, you can stop the mass murder immediately. And then of course we saw the Indiana mall situation. Elisha, I forget his last name, this 22-year-old kid, same thing, man. Within 15 seconds, he engaged the mass murderer, took out the mass murderer unbelievably. I mean, talk about incredible. 8 out of 10 shots from 40 yards away. I do training constantly. I don't know if I can't say that under pressure I would perform that well. I actually want to test it at our next training, but I mean, that's a phenomenal response. But only 3 people died. I don't mean that lightly. That guy could have killed 100 people in that mall.
Exactly.
And if it hadn't been for the intervention and again, the proximity, maybe, SEAL Team 6 could descend on that mall and he would have been able to kill dozens of people before they could get in there and get to him. But because Elijah was there in proximity, had the weapon and immediately engaged, ended the threat with a minimal loss of life. And that's the way it should be.
Yeah, I think so too. Because I mean, like you said, SEAL Team 6 could have gotten there and ended it, but it would have been after a lot of people died. So for people who are thinking about getting a firearm to conceal carry, well, like what advice would you give them?
Number one, as we've already said, train, get a good course. There's so many options out there now. Almost every community has not just a gun range, but people that are doing training. Unfortunately, a lot of times the training will end up being some former spec ops guy that wants to show off more than he wants to train. That I've found that unfortunately to be too often the case. But there's a lot of good people out there too that are doing training. So come to one of ours if you can. We're not doing them every month like we were before. Right now it's only 3 or 4 times a year, but hopefully by January we'll be having them much more often again. We've got one in September and October. But bottom line is get trained and then train with the weapon that you're going to carry. If you don't know yet what you're going to carry, then go to a training, use something simple like a Glock 19 that doesn't, I'm a 1911 guy myself, but even an added safety with a 1911, I recommend to people train first with a Glock and figure out if you like that, then train with something like a 1911, or you can try other things and then figure out what's really best for you. But number one is training. And I don't mean just, most concealed carry tests are, you go out there and you have a few hours of lectures, and then you go out to the range and it's so easy to pass the test. It's not real training at all. So I don't mean even just a one-day training. I think absolutely it takes a minimum of 2 or 3 days. Ours is actually a 5-day training because we do a lot of Constitution training as well. It's a mixture of Constitution training and handgun training, but definitely get good training, because otherwise you're gonna freeze up in the moment, or the gun's gonna be taken from you and used on you or on someone else. The training is essential. So number one is training, and then there's a lot of places like you can go to a Cabela's, and sometimes in there, depending on the location at their range, they'll let you try out multiple guns, and so you have an opportunity to you might end up being a revolver person. You might prefer to have a revolver. And there's so many options. It can be overwhelming. You go to a gun store, you're like, oh my goodness, there's so many options. And your hand size, it depends on your hand size. It depends on, there's so many different things. So I just recommend keep it simple. For a lot of people, for my wife and my daughter, they both carry a Glock 43, which is the smaller version. I really like a SIG P938, which is almost like a miniature 1911, about the same size as a Glock 43, just different mechanisms. So there's a lot of good options out there, but I say first and foremost, get training and start finding people that you can talk to and learn and get comfortable. The cool thing about training is, and Jeff, honestly, most people that come through our training never touched a gun in their life, never fired a gun in their life. They're scared to death when they get there. I mean, that first morning, the first time that everybody actually fires, which is actually after a few hours of safety training and everything else, they're scared to death. By the end of the 4 or 5 days, man, they're comfortable with that firearm. It's a life-changing experience. So for people that are watching, don't double negative, horrible grammar here, but don't not do this because of fear and because you're just not familiar with it and you've only seen the bad or you're worried about that firearm. If you go to a good training, by the end of the week, you're going to realize that firearm is just like a car. It's no different than learning to drive a car, which is also potentially a deadly weapon. It's all about knowledge and skill and muscle memory and just really, getting good training.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I was really surprised by when I first decided, okay, I'm going to get a gun. See, I'm the kind of guy that, I mean, if I did make a decision like that, I'm going to do all this research. I probably watched every YouTube video on it. I did a lot of reading. I mean, my audience has a lot of gun owners. I was asking them. And it was amazing to me that a lot of people will buy a gun without even firing it first and not even train with it. I'm like, why would you do that? I mean, because with me, I'll tell you what I did. So I did the research, and there was a range near where I lived that offered classes. So I had narrowed it down to 3 different pistols that I wanted to try: the SIG P320, M&P 2.0 compact, and the Canik TP9. And so this range offered a class where you can try out 3 different guns.
Nice.
That was the first time I ever fired a gun too. So he kind of, I already knew the safety rules, but he kind of went over that with me, what to do, let the trigger surprise you and all that. And I tried all 3, and I ended up going with the M&P because that fits my hands the best. I'm a bigger guy, but I'm like, I wouldn't, it never even occurred to me to just get a gun without knowing how it felt when I fired it first. And then after that, I did an hour and a half training at the same range with the private instructor. It wasn't that expensive. I mean, it wasn't cheap, but it was affordable. And so I went through an hour and a half with just me and him, and he's showing me the ropes. And then even after that, I did another training up in Dallas because I went into this knowing, if I'm going to have a gun, I need to know how to use it and how to use it proficiently. So why do you think that some people will say, okay, oh, I heard a Glock's good, so I'm just going to get a Glock 19 and I'm going to be good to go? And, they don't, maybe they take one class, maybe to get their license, and then that's it. Why do people do that?
I think we grow up watching the movies and the TV shows, and we think, that by seeing other people do it so much that we're going to be able to do it, or because we had a Nerf gun as a kid or whatever, and that it's just going to be, the same thing. I think that's honestly what it is. And it may also just be the fear, they're like, okay, I feel like I need this thing, but I'm also afraid to actually go and do the training and test it out. So I think it's a combination of all those things. I think what you did is exactly the right way to do it. And I think people will be surprised at how easy it is to get training, to try out a gun like that. Like even on our trainings, we rent, you can rent a gun. And so that you don't even have to buy a gun before you go do even a full 5-day training with someone like us. So yeah, I think it's probably just, I mean, I don't mean this as an insult, but it's ignorance. It's just not knowing. No one's ever taught them or told them. We used to do this stuff in school, right? I mean, in the 50s, you had gun classes in school. People had rifle classes. They had handgun. Yeah. I mean, it was kind of part of in most places in the country, part of how you grew up. And we just allowed this culture of the gun is bad. And so we're afraid of them and we stay away from them when it's just an inanimate object. But you did it exactly the right way. And that's what I recommend other people do as well.
Yeah, me too. I mean, my mom, I don't know if I mentioned this on the last time we talked, but my mom has expressed interest in getting a gun, which is funny because when I first got mine, she was terrified. Like, she's terrified of guns. We're from Southern California, so that's why. But now it's funny, I didn't even have to persuade her. I would just talk to her about what I was doing, and now she wants to get one. So when she's ready, I'm going to have her go through the same process that I did, because it's important, especially for a woman. I mean, that's the equalizer.
It is, man, the great equalizer. I'm that way with my daughter. She weighs probably 95 pounds, and I don't care how much jujitsu she knows. If she ends up with a 250-pound, 300-pound guy, she's done, and so for a lady, the firearms essential. And surprisingly, 55% of the people that come through our class are women. So, they're 55, 45. So they way outnumber the guys. Most of the time the guys are coming because their wife is dragging them there because, we think we don't need it, but they're like, I think I've seen you handle that gun. You need training. so that's kind of fun too. I love watching the ladies go through the class and, scared at first. And by the end of the week, you just see it in their eyes, the confidence, the ability to get rid of that fear. Because for them, we've never experienced what it's like to walk from the grocery store door to the car late at night and be scared and worried that you're gonna be raped or you're gonna be kidnapped or whatever. And for most ladies, they've experienced that somewhere at some point in their life and had a scary looking person, or whatever that put the major fear in them. And so we don't, as guys, necessarily, and you're a bigger guy than I am, and I'm a little guy. If without a gun, I'm in trouble as it is. But I mean, for the ladies, they live with that all the time. Yeah. And this is a game changer for them. It's really empowering for them. It's a pretty cool thing to watch.
Good. Yeah, I'm really excited to see you go through it. So when people do start carrying, so they've already made the decision, maybe they've gotten some training. What are some of the biggest mistakes people make when they start to conceal carry, like in their everyday lives?
I think probably number one is they don't carry enough because they're worried about where they can go I'm in Texas, so for Texas, you have this thing called a 30-06 sign. It's actually the code 30.06. Yeah. We call it 30.06 because it's gun world. But if you see that 30.06 sign on a business, then you're not supposed to carry in that business. It's private property, and I'm a private property guy too, and I think they should have the right to be able to tell you can't carry there. I just don't give them my business, so I don't go eat in a place that won't allow me to carry my gun because it puts me in a situation where I can't defend my family. And so I think what a lot of people do when they get the license, they are afraid to carry because they're like, okay, now what do I do with it? If I do decide to go in somewhere where I can't carry, now I got to leave it in the car. And what do I do about that? And if somebody breaks my car, they're going to get it. So I always recommend, look, just study the law. And most good concealed carry teachers, so if they're doing your one-day class with you, they're going to give you a pretty good overview of the law in your particular state, where you can carry, where you can't, that sort of thing. So knowing the law when you carry is very, very important. And then being bold, just saying, look, this is going to become a way of life for me. I am going to be the wise person that takes precaution. And I think what that means in today's society, to take precaution today means I don't go almost anywhere without carrying. The only time I am not carrying is if I get a speaking request in a state that I don't have reciprocity and I'm not allowed to carry. And I carry a taser actually when I can in those states if it's legal, so that I have something. But I think just the first thing, first training, obviously make that good decision with the gun, and then do the homework and know the law, and don't shy away from carrying because you're afraid of all these places where you can't carry. Like in Texas, I can carry almost anywhere. I mean, I can't carry in, a school. I can't carry in, a Major League Baseball game, that sort of thing. But for most places I can. And if they've got a 30.06 sign, I just take my business elsewhere. The good thing in Texas is they changed it a couple of years ago. If you don't see a 30.06 sign and you go in, and someone notices that you're carrying, maybe you print, meaning like you lean a certain way and they can tell there's a gun under there. If the owner comes over and asks you to leave, that's when you're not going to be fined or lose your license just because you accidentally carried in there. You just have to leave at that point if they ask you to. And I think that was a really important change in the law because people were always paranoid about, what if I accidentally carry somewhere I'm not supposed to carry, and then I'm going to lose my license or be prosecuted. So we had a really good change in the law there that I think is good. I'll say just real quick, you didn't ask this, but I'll say this. I'm not an open carry fan. I mean, I think it should be legal. Absolutely should be legal. Yeah. And because it also allows me, if I'm concealed carry and I do print, or I get out to fill up with gas and I don't cover up my gun or whatever it might be. And sometimes strategically I do that when I'm getting gas because I'm actually saying to people,
don't mess with me.
I'm not the guy you want to come up and
you don't want any of the smoke.
Right. And they're far enough away to where I don't like open carry for two reasons. Number one, it tells the bad guy I'm the one to take out if they are going to do something. And so I don't want them to have that warning. With concealed carry, they don't know. In Texas, like you go into a store, you have no idea how many people and who all's carrying. But the other reason is if it's open carry, you have to be much more cognizant of even standing in line. Like, can that person behind me grab my gun before I notice that they're there or what? I mean, I think about this stuff when I go into the bathroom, in a gas station or a restaurant or whatever. I pick the stall where, being right-handed, my gun is against the wall and not going to be next to somebody that comes, just thinking through that kind of stuff. And I'm not like paranoid about it. I just naturally.
No, but it's life-changing. I mean, when you start to conceal carry, you have to change some things up a little bit.
How you dress, you change how you dress. Like, I mean, partly because I got a belly now that I didn't used to have, but also because of concealed carry, I'm always wearing untucked shirts. Like I always have these, unless I'm wearing a suit and then I got a coat, that can cover it. So it completely changed the way I dress. I also partly because of the belly, but I had to get a size bigger on belts and
Yep.
pants because I'm
too.
using it inside the belt, so it does. You're right. It's a change. And people out there watching, don't let that scare you off, or I don't want to make all those changes. It's worth it. Don't be the fool that walks blindly on. Be the prudent person.
Yeah, and it's not that hard. You do have to make some changes, but once you've made them, it becomes a habit.
Yeah.
So it's not that big of a deal. But now I want to ask you about the police.
Yeah.
I bet this question comes up a lot. What happens? I mean, and you're legally carrying the gun, you might have it on your person, but you get pulled over, maybe your brake light was out or something like that. How should you handle that situation? I know it's different from state to state depending on whether you have to inform the officer or not, but what would you recommend?
I recommend informing them, and of course, again, I'm in Texas, so it's a different culture right there. Most of the police officers, when I handle my license, I handle my handgun license at the same time. And that's my way of saying, hey, I'm also a concealed carry holder. They usually smile. They're usually like, okay, good. You're one of the good guys. So it's actually the opposite of what you would think. It's not like they're, oh no, this guy's got a gun. But they will sometimes say, do you have the firearm on you, and where is it? And I say, it's on my hip, and yes, I have it. And then, everything's cool from there. So I recommend letting them know just because it honestly puts them at ease, especially if you have a handgun license, because they know you've passed a background check. Right. You've done, it doesn't mean you're not a bad guy that managed to do all that, but the statistics they know are a lot better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I haven't had it happen to me yet, but I am concerned. So, I mean, that's kind of what I've been advised too, because it is the opposite of what people think. I mean, and people will bring up like Philando Castile and other cases, and I know those happen. Yeah. But I have to go with what happens normally.
Right.
People who have licenses aren't getting shot by the police left and right. So I figure, I mean, I'd rather tell them, instead of them seeing the gun and I didn't say anything, and and then I have a problem. But
that's right.
I'll have to just cross that bridge when I come to it. I mean, I'm in Florida, which is pretty gun friendly too. So but I was in Texas. That's where I got my gun and all my training and stuff. So
well, and that, Jeff, too, what you just described is it's all about not surprising them, right? Like the last thing you want to do is surprise a police officer that all of a sudden there's a gun, right? Because then their training kicks in, and then they're going to respond when they know they only have seconds to respond if you are actually about to use that gun against them. And so that's the last thing you want. You want it to be, with your hands visible. They now know that you have one, and the fact that you would tell them you have one, totally changes the tone and atmosphere of the situation. I will also say, with a little caveat here, times are changing, and law enforcement is becoming not the same as what it used to be in terms of potentially being a more and more of a weapon against the people. And so I don't mean that as a conspiracy theorist. I mean, it's partly the FBI thing right now that's going on. It's just that we're so split in this country now. My concern is that when a nation ends up where we are right now, whoever's in power starts to use law enforcement against the other side. And so I just, we've always had a little bit of that because that's the nature of man, but man, it's just becoming more and more prevalent. And so, that could change how to approach that in the future.
Yeah, see, now I have to have you back on just to talk about that, because I've been thinking of that too. Like that's a whole topic in and of itself.
Yeah, no doubt, man.
It's a little scary, honestly. And I know people are focused on the FBI right now, but local police departments have corruption too.
Absolutely.
And not all of them. Most officers, most FBI agents are probably fine.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that. I mean, when it comes to the state, we should be wary whether it's at the local, state, or federal level.
I was thinking the exact same things you were saying. That a healthy skepticism is good. Always holding them accountable. There's always going to be some level of corruption because we're human beings. Right. So there's always going to be that bad cop or bad teacher or bad whatever. And so we shouldn't paint the broad stroke and say everybody is that, but we should be aware that is there, and therefore the laws and the whole system have to account for that and have to allow for the citizen. I mean, that's the whole idea, right, of the American jurisprudence system and the Bill of Rights and due process and all of that. And the fact that we've started hating each other so much that we're willing to throw that out and not have blind justice, equal justice, and due process. Man, that's such a dangerous road. And it could take us over the brink. I mean, I'm really concerned about that. Of all the problems and things in our country right now, the lack of blind justice and the lack of equal justice is oh man, we've seen that in our history in ugly ways, and we had come so far away from that in the last 30-40 years. So much progress, and then now it's going to be about political instead of what your skin color is. It's going to be which party are you a part of, and oh, that's just so bad. I mean, I hate it. It's not the American way,
It's tragic. But so what are some tips that you would have for a beginner who is training, like just on their own, like, because you take your classes, but you should train it by yourself too. So what kind of tips would you give in that regard? Man,
that's a great question, because a lot of times we think it's just firing the gun when it's got ammo in it. Dry practice. We hammer that in whenever we're doing our class, because you actually get better physically when you're doing dry practice, meaning you're practicing with your firearm without ammo in it or with dummy rounds in it, because you can see, for instance, when you mash a trigger. So when you're firing your gun, if you're mashing the trigger because you're expecting that big recoil, when you mash, you actually are pressing down on the gun. And that's why when you look at your target, if you got all of your rounds are like down and to the left, you're mashing the trigger. Well, I'm
going to bring that up too in a second. Yeah, I'm selfish, and that's my biggest weakness.
Well, see that if you're only trying to correct that on the range with live rounds in your gun, it's very hard because you're trying to react to it and all that. When you start dry practicing without anything in the gun, you can really see the gun move. You can feel the trigger better all the way to that actual place of firing, and then feel that trigger reset. We really push dry practicing. In fact, more time dry practicing than actually live firing. Plus, it's cheaper, so because you're not spending 30 cents or 40 cents every time you fire, and you can do it not anywhere but almost anywhere. And we have a lot of safety rules for that as well, because you still treat the gun like it's loaded, and you still find a place in your home that there's nothing on the other side of that wall and all that good stuff. But it is vitally important, and you can do it. You don't have to be with an instructor. It can be on your own. I cannot tell you how many hours we spent in dry practice, especially those first few years when we were first really learning the skills. So that's huge. And then the other thing I would recommend is a plan in your home. So in other words, having a plan with your family should something happen for where everybody's going to go. We teach people how to clear rooms, how to go through the house, all that kind of stuff, because, Lord willing, it never happens. But if you have that skill and you know how to not just walk around that door and then be, a sitting duck for that bad guy, all of those things are really important, and you can practice those at home.
So what would you say are some of the biggest parts of learning to shoot that people struggle the most with? I mean, you mentioned recoil anticipation. Well, what are some other areas?
Oh, man. It's really all of it. It's it's first the mental, and learning to really treat that gun with respect. All the safety part, I think everybody pretty well gets down. And then in terms of on the range, actually honing in that skill and getting that sight picture quickly and learning that trigger control, so that your finger becomes, the muscle memory becomes so natural you don't have to think about it in the moment when you're shooting. And that takes a lot of practice to do that. But there's so many little things about the presentation. Like by the time you finish our course for 5 days, the whole purpose of the course, everything in the course is built around the physical practice and muscle memory and the mental part, but to be able to present your weapon from concealed, so that with a jacket or whatever, from concealed, and put 2 in the thoracic cavity in 1.5 seconds. Now that's very fast. That's a lot of muscle memory. And that means you're practicing seating your hand correctly every time. You're practicing coming out and getting that control on the weapon, taking out the slack as you're presenting the weapon, finding that sight picture. I mean, all of those things, the trigger reset, all of those little bitty things. That's why it takes 5 days, really, because we spend time on each of those little bitty things, and then it all comes together. As the end of that course happens, you begin to be able to do all of those things all at once. So it's really hard to say what's the one or two things, because I think it's just so many pieces of the puzzle that. And I always tell people about 2 days in, or about 2.5 days in, I always say, listen, I know your brain's fried right now, and you got all of these things that you're trying to think about that we're teaching you, but it will all come together. And then by the end of the, end of the course, everybody, I love watching them on the range as they're doing the drills and everything's coming together. So it's, man, it's hard to say just one thing.
Yeah. So when I went up to Dallas to do my second training, it was with a former Marine, and he was really good. I mean, it was an outside range, and I was there for like 2-3 hours, and he was just training me, and it was just me. And because it was just me. And he brought me through that process, putting your hand on the gun, clearing the holster, and then presenting and all that stuff. It was tough. I mean, I almost felt like I was learning a martial art, because it really is like that. And
yes,
and he had me doing it, moving around, moving forward, moving backwards. I'm like, this isn't the normal way you move when and I'm shooting the same target, but then I'm moving and then shooting it again, moving, shooting it again, and practicing my draw. It was tough, but by the end of the class, I had gotten it pretty well. So it can be learned, but it's not. You're not just going to walk right in and be able to be John Wick. Like, you do have to practice.
That's right. You're spot on, man. I'll tell you. In fact, there's if people want to watch the Brad Stein Experience. I don't know if you know Brad or not. He's a comedian, and we do this thing called Comedy and Constitution together. But he came out and went through our course with us, and we did a little mini TV thing, series on it. It's just a two-part series, like 20 minutes each episode. And he's so funny, but then it's such a serious thing, right? So it's this great mix of his humor going through a very serious class, but you really get to see what the class is like and those steps as you're doing it. And he said basically what you just said. He said, this is hard. This is hard work. I mean, you've got to work for this skill to be good at this and confident in it. But it's a lot of muscle memory. It's a lot of the muscle memory part you want to get down so that you're not having to think about those things, so that you can be thinking about situational awareness and what's happening in the room. And it doesn't happen immediately. A private lesson like you're talking about, you can learn a lot faster, but it's still, it's still a matter of that repetition. I think when you come out in the fall with us, you're going to be amazed by spending that, basically 8 hours a day, for four days. When you mix our whole class together, it's a 5-day thing, but a big part of it's just Constitution class too. But when you spend that much time on it, the exponential growth because of you doing those things right back to back is just phenomenal. It's weird how the body and the brain work, but it's well worth the effort. I'm telling you, I cannot tell you how much joy I got out of watching my boys and my daughter learn this, and to see them go from nothing to excelling and getting that time with them. My wife, same thing. I've had people as old as 91 go through the course, and
wow,
it's incredible. And we do as young as 11, so it's 11 years old, and then unlimited. I haven't had a 100-year-old yet, but 91's the oldest that I've had go through it. And he went through the whole thing, man, 5 days. And then I had an 89-year-old. Actually, she let me know. I interviewed her afterwards. She's like, "No, I'm 89 and a half." Okay. 89 and a half, and she went through the whole thing. So it's hard work, but it's very doable.
Okay. All right. So last question, because I want to be sensitive to time here.
Sure.
What would you say to somebody who, maybe they've been seeing what's going on in the country? We know gun sales have gone up, and they're thinking about maybe getting a gun, but they have some concerns about it. Maybe they're not that confident. What would you tell them as to why they should probably take that step?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be a fear monger, but I have to say, just think about, just close your eyes and project into a situation where one of these 4 million violent crimes a year happens to your family or happens in your restaurant where you're eating, and that you weren't ready, trained, and able and prepared to defend your family. Someone in your family either loses their life or is injured as a result of that. How would you feel? I mean, that was my turning point. When I thought about that, I thought, wow, I do not want to be that fool that walks blindly on. I want to be the prudent person that took precautions. And to know, hopefully through our conversation today, that it's doable, that it's not as difficult as people think, that it's not impossible, that all the stuff you see in the movies and TV, most of it's horrible. It's fake. It's horrible skills. There's very few that do it right. I mean, Chris Pratt does a great job in Terminal List. I think he did really good training. And of course, you know, Keanu Reeves is the master in John
Yeah, you
Wick.
start to notice. It's funny because I start to notice when actors, I'm like, oh, okay, that guy doesn't know what he's doing.
That's right. I'm telling you, after you train, you cannot watch a movie the same again because you're looking for, why has he got his finger on the trigger when that's horrible. You know, so yeah, we became major critics on all of that. But yeah, I would just say to people, don't you can't. It's the kind of regret you can't get rid of if you do end up in that situation. And so don't be that guy or gal. You owe it to your family. You owe it to yourself. And it's so easy. It's inexpensive now. It's not as expensive as it used to be. I mean, you can train with us. It's about $100 a day. You'd probably find somebody locally for $200 to $300 a day if you're doing a full day class with them. You know, so it's not prohibitive. Let's put it that way. And it's well worth the investment. Whatever you got to, if you're on a really tight budget, whatever you got to cut or give up to spend the money to get the training, buy a gun, you know, and continue to do the training, do it. It is so worth it.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you joining me. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you before we sign off?
Sure. PatriotAcademy.com is our main website. And for these courses, look for constitutional defense. And there's actually a video course on our website that you can take. And actually, you can get it for free. If you sign up as a Constitution coach, it'll be in your dashboard. But and that's free. But it's a 7-week Constitution class, but it's done at one of our courses, and so you get to see a lot of the training kind of happen. So I think sometimes when you see this stuff on video and you kind of know what you'd be going through in a training, it helps. It puts you a little bit more at ease to say, okay, yeah, I could do that.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining me, and hopefully we can have you back again soon.
You bet. Enjoyed it, Jeff. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you too.